Hey guys, my name is Graham Johnson. Welcome back to Tabletop Glory. Today we're going to be painting this car and doing some really basic rust effects. Hope you guys enjoy that. But I really want to talk to you guys about brand loyalty. Whoa, hold on. Before you just take that out of context, this video is not going to be what you think it is. And I'm going to try to make it as non-political as I can. I'm not even sure if political is the right word. Non-consumerism as I can. But please bear with me and please watch this video because I think it's really important. As someone who owned a hobby store and still technically does own a hobby store, I ran into a lot of people who were brand elitists. One of my favorite things to have happen oftentimes was to have people constantly whinge and moan about how bad Citadel paints were and about how they'll never use Citadel paints because they had one bad experience, and then walk over to the display case and give me compliments on some of my miniatures that I had painted, and then beg me to ask them which brands of paint I had used because they couldn't wait to paint something similar. And then I follow it up by telling them that it was Citadel paints. So that's what I really want to talk about is, does the brand actually matter? And why should we care or not care? And I think you guys might find it interesting. And is it a good or bad thing? And is it a good or bad thing to have just a bunch of everything? As someone who has a bunch of everything, I think I might be qualified to talk about this. So I started out by laying a mixture of base tones of flat earth and orange brown from the model color line for Vallejo. Now I wanted to do this to build up a mixture of rust type colors. You could also sprinkle in a little bit of orange rust by Vallejo as well. I didn't want to go too overboard as I don't really plan to put this model upside down that often. As I'm going to be spending so much time on the rest of the paint job, I really wanted that to be the star of this terrain piece, so there's not really a need to go super over the top. Now I know I don't do too many live streams here on YouTube these days. I would like to start doing that again soon, but I don't really get a whole lot of anything out of it as YouTube doesn't consider the watch hours from a live stream to go toward monetization. So the time that I would spend doing live streams here on YouTube, unfortunately, take away from the times I would have to edit videos. Now all that having been said, I do still do live streams every Sunday morning on TikTok. Now I used to do them on Saturday nights for those of you who came over from TikTok. I believe you'll remember that. I used to stream for about 10 hours minimum. And during those live streams, I would constantly get the questions of what brand of brushes do you use and what brands of paint do you use? Or is there one specific brand of paint that you would recommend over other brands? And a lot of times I would just unhook my camera from whatever it was mounted to and point it at my paint rack and joke around about, well, you can see the brands that I use and you can see which ones I own the most of, and that's for a reason. But over the last year, I've done a lot of thinking about this and wondering why I chose certain brands, and was it really out of convenience or was it because they were actual quality brands that were worth having in my collection? And should I be recommending these brands to you as well? A lot of times when we think about the classic argument of brand loyalty, we think, do you like Coke or do you like Pepsi? And the reality is that this happens throughout our lives constantly. And one of the places that it probably affects the most in a negative way is our hobby space. Sometimes we can kind of get stuck into our ways and get stuck into our roots, and we get complacent. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that complacency, especially when we figured out our art style and we figured out how we enjoy painting. There can be a certain point where maybe you're just happy with the way that you paint and you don't really want to advance beyond that, and that's absolutely fine. If you're happy with that, then you're happy with that, and nobody can tell you that you're wrong. But for those of us who still want to continue to improve and grow, That complacency can be a real black dog, so to speak. It can be a place that kind of mentally gets us down in a way that we didn't realize it was. And we don't understand that our complacency is what's doing it. A lot of times I get really frustrated when I'm not making the advancements I think I should, or I'm not picking up on new styles and techniques the way that I want to pick up on them. And I realize that my biggest flaw is that I'm falling back on things that make me comfortable. I'm going back to doing things the way that I was doing them because I know that they work. And then because I'm not doing the motions, or I'm not going through the motions in the way that maybe the tutorial or someone who explained it to me in that order, and I'm not following along, I'm not getting as much out of it, and I'm not seeing the growth that I want to see, and I'm not getting those final results that I was really hoping that I would get. And so as a result, becoming complacent and just falling back on things that I know work, well, although it kind of gives me a little boost of serotonin, I don't really learn anything. A lot of times when new miniature painters come into my live streams, I will oftentimes tell them that you are going to make your biggest leaps and your biggest growth in this hobby when you're not happy with what you're painting, when you're frustrated, and continuing to paint through that frustration and to paint through your mistakes because you might be happy with the final result. A lot of times in painting in general, not just miniature painting, we have what's called the ugly stage of painting, where we constantly think, oh my god, what have I done? I've ruined this. And the reality is that no, we haven't. We're just at that ugly stage where we have to have faith and push through. And when we're at that ugly stage, a lot of times when we're learning new techniques, we constantly fear that we're messing things up. And so we fall back on what we know works. And then rather than making the advancements that we were hoping we were making, we make these tiny little incremental steps. And we feel like we're not improving. We feel like we're not picking up on new techniques. We feel like we're failing. Even though we end up with a miniature that we're happy with at the end of the day, we still feel like we're failing because we're not making those leaps and bounds like we hoped we would. And that can be real detrimental to the hobby game. It can make you want to stop painting for a while. And if you've ever stopped painting, you know that sometimes it can be really hard to get back into miniature painting. You can just feel like you have hobby burnout just because you've taken a few days off. Now I can hear some of you guys already down in the comments below. Alright, so big whoop. We break some of our bad habits, but how exactly do you go about doing that? And unfortunately, the reality is just trusting in the process. I wish there was a way that I could tell you. For me personally, when I notice that I'm starting to go back on old habits, when I'm trying to learn new techniques, I put the model down, I finish what I'm doing, I don't stop in the middle of it because otherwise it'll be impossible to get exactly back where I started, but I put the model down and I come back to it. I give myself about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, go maybe get something to drink or make something to eat, and then I come back down and I try to sit down fresh. And that may involve repainting something that I just did in order to get back to a point where I'm either following my tutorial or I'm back in the experimentation mode of trying something new. Trying to stay in that experimental mode and not just constantly falling back on your old habits is really difficult. It's insanely difficult. We as humans are hardwired to follow habit. We're creatures of habit. And so breaking those is insanely difficult, and I wish there was an easy way for me to help you. And maybe there's a psychologist out there somewhere who knows the answer, but unfortunately, I don't. So I can only tell you what works for me, and hopefully it works for you. Secondly, if I find that coming back to a project fresh is not really helping me, and I keep falling back into old habits, sometimes just starting the miniature over again is a great way to kind of get back into experimental mode. I am the #1 advocate for always finish what you start, but sometimes you can just start over in the middle of a project. If it's not turning out the way that you want, and you know that by finishing it, you're just going to end up with something similar to what you already have, and that wasn't the goal of today's painting process, then by all means, stop. Either get a new model that you could experiment with, or strip the one down that you're currently working on and start over again. especially if the goal of that painting session is to learn something new. If you're not learning something new, there's no shame in starting over. So as we start bringing this video into a close, I want to leave this with you guys. Do you think that brand loyalty can hold you back, or am I just full of hot air? I know to a certain extent that no, it won't, but in my personal opinion, at a certain point, it really does. You start limiting yourself on the types of products that are available to you, and although you could buy one or two other things while mostly still constraining yourself to a single brand, I feel like by doing so, you're kind of taking away a lot of the creative freedoms that you could have. Also, try not to accumulate too much stuff. I know oftentimes when I'm working on projects, I have purchased some things in the past where I knew I was going to use them, and then I still haven't. One of the most expensive tools that I have ever bought is a circle cutting jig, which I knew was going to come in handy when I started working on Gundams. Now, I purchased the circle cutting jig 3 years ago, and outside of using it a couple of times to test it and learn how it works, I have never used it. This is almost $100. And although it's really nice, and it does its job exactly how it should, down to a precise degree, that's $100 I could have spent on more miniatures or other paints or anything like that. So there's a lot of circle cutting jigs out there that I could have bought for like 20 bucks, but I fell in love with the brand because I had used a few of their other products, and I allowed my brand loyalty to kick in, and I bought something really expensive that ultimately I didn't need to buy. So where exactly am I going with all of this? Well, I suppose we can surmise this down to two things. Number one, brand loyalty can definitely hold you back. There are so many different wonderful products across so many different brands that honestly just sticking to one brand is probably going to screw you over in the long run. Now, if you only have like a local hobby store for you to be able to buy stuff through because you don't want to do stuff on Amazon or you don't know what you're looking for, that's one thing. Go ahead and just buy from your local store and buy the brands that they have. But as you start to kind of explore the hobby game and maybe watch more YouTube content and learn about other brands and other products that you could be using, maybe consider taking a look for that stuff either locally or Amazon and eBay. Always buy local first. Help out your local hobby stores. They wouldn't be there without you. But number two, just because you can get a plethora of different products, just because you can have a large collection of products, that also doesn't mean that it's going to help you. Having a ton of stuff is great, but if you don't know how to use it or you don't use it very often, it's just kind of taking up clutter and in the long run kind of ends up as a waste of money. So try and experiment around with different products, see what you like, and if you think you're going to be using it often, then go ahead and repurchase it when it runs out. I know a lot of hobbyists, both here on YouTube and over on TikTok, that are paint collectors, and they just collect different brands of paint. If you watch Ninjon's intro on YouTube, that man has an insane amount of paint. And I know a few guys over on TikTok where the inside of their paint studio looks like the inside of a hobby store with just racks and racks of paint. You're never going to go through all that. It's going to expire before you use it. And in fact, I have some paints that I consider to be core essential parts of my hobby kit that I don't use that often, and I'm constantly having to re-add medium, like airbrush medium or glaze medium or whatever to it to keep it good, because I'm not using it often enough because I have such a plethora of products that I'm not using those products often enough that they get mixed up often enough to stay good. So just because you can have a large collection of stuff doesn't mean you should, and just because you like a certain brand doesn't mean you should stick to a certain brand. It's such this weird game of cat and mouse where we're constantly trying to get a collective balance of a nice collection of hobby products that we enjoy using, while also having enough hobby products to experiment when we're ready to start learning something new. And that's something that's going to be different for everybody. Just because I have 200 bottles of paint or 300 bottles of paint or however many bottles I have around here doesn't mean that you as a hobbyist are going to want 300 bottles of paint. You might have 25 or 30 bottles of paint, and that's absolutely fine. As we grow as hobbyists and as we grow as artists, our collections are going to change and they're going to evolve, and just because we really liked a certain brand when we first started doesn't mean that we're going to like a brand later down the road. Like I said, I'm starting to really enjoy Vallejo despite the fact that I have so much Citadel, and I'm really starting to like Army Painter now that I've done a deal with them and I've gotten a real chance to play around with their paints. Then I'm actually starting to supplement some of my Citadel stuff for Army Painter. So get out there, experiment. Just because you really love a brand doesn't mean there isn't something better out there for you. And don't forget the most important part, paint your minis. Collections are great, but they mean nothing if you're not going to use it, especially here in the hobby game. So go ahead, slay the gray, and get your minis painted. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!